I didn't have this slide before the fire chat, but I felt like it's very critical to summarize all the discussion points that we went through. And I've been discussing this with a lot of CISOs as we chat about things like supply chain attacks, ransomware attacks, and more recently, exchange attacks. Like, what are the top three priorities, like top buckets, where you would put in all of your security initiatives? So these are the three areas where I find a lot of the CISOs trying to improve visibility, trying to increase their security and visibility, and then eliminating the inherent trust that exists in a lot of the architectural pieces that are part of the legacy enterprise network. So the first one is prevent threats, exploit CNC activity. You need to make sure you have consistent security policies across the board. Last 12 months, a lot of the work environment changed with majority of your employee workforce working remotely. And even in the near future, you're not going to see that change drastically. You will always have a hybrid work environment. So how do you adapt to that? So having that consistent inspection, both inline as well as out of band with full SSL inspection, is very, very important. Reduce your enterprise attack surface. The example that Andy pointed out, right, spinning up an AWS instance and within seconds, the adversaries are able to detect it if you don't have proper mitigating controls in place. So uh, make sure you're monitoring your enterprise attack surface. We have a tool on our corporate site as well where you could put in your domain and we will be able to generate what all things are exposed to the internet that the adversaries can target. And finally, eliminate lateral propagation, right? The goal over here is if one of your endpoint were to get compromised, right, it should not be able to bring down your entire network. And I'll show some examples of real world attack cycles, right? What it would look like if you had a legacy architecture versus a zero trust architecture, how difficult it becomes for an adversary to propagate in their attack chain. Now, a lot of these things that I've been talking about, interestingly, NSA just recently also released a guidance on this, and it is embracing zero trust security model. Uh, Never trust, always verify, assume breach, and then it should all be identity based, whether it's applications, users, right? You should not rely on IP based segmentation in this hybrid environment. Now, to give you guys some context on where some of the telemetry, some of the data and case studies that I'll be sharing in this session, where does that come from? So, a quick two-slide overview. This is how ThreatLabZ operates in the backend. The goal is to break the kill chain at multiple levels. So we have group of researchers that are focusing on the initial delivery vector, where things like phishing attacks, spear phishing campaigns, drive-by downloads, or even the more advanced watering hole attacks where the adversaries are trying to compromise one of the popular destinations that certain industry verticals visit. There's a group of researchers that focus explicitly on the exploits. This includes things like Exchange server exploits, browser exploits. The goal over there is to detect and break the exploit attempt. There's a group that focused on the malware analysis, tracking of different APT malware families as well. And then finally, a group that is monitoring the attack infrastructure, the command and control servers that are being leveraged, CNC destinations that the operators are using to send commands to the infected host. So all the intelligence that comes out of the group flows into different levels of the Zscaler security stack, and it takes forms of reputation indicators like domain IP hashes, IPS signatures. We also have AI ML models which are targeting different parts of the kill chain. And then, of course, controls, proactive controls like sandbox, browser isolation, all of those are very, very critical in dismantling these kind of attack chains. Now, the beauty of this, we are able to do it at scale with full SSL inspection. We have replicated this stack across 150 data centers. And on any given day, we are processing more than 150 billion transactions. So that gives us access to a lot of rich data set. Um, to give you a recent number, we are blocking over 125 million threats now, right? And this number keeps growing. Every single thread that we block allows us access to a lot of rich telemetry information. I'll show you what that looks like in the next slide, but that results in about 175,000 unique updates that are flowing back into the cloud. And it's a self-learning model. So as soon as we block something, we'll extract a lot of artifacts out of that block, and that goes back into the product to provide extended coverage. So a quick view of what the threat intel lifecycle looks like in Zscaler. We have several sources, commercial feeds, industry partnerships. We also collaborate actively with our customers. It all flows into our threat intel database after some level of enrichment. We have our content-based detection, behavioral coverage. All of those, when applied to the traffic that flows through the Zscaler cloud, will result in threats getting blocked. Now, for every thread that gets blocked, like I mentioned, we will then collect things like URLs, domains, IP, ASNs, hashes, a lot more other information that then allows us to implement extended blocks for similar attacks that are automatically blocked in the cloud for all the customers. This is something that we refer to as cloud effect, where we learn from one transaction and apply it to all the users in the Zscaler ecosystem. For things that are not detected, obviously these allows opportunity for threat labs to then perform data analytics, and I'll show you some of the dashboards where we are exposing some of that information as well. It's actually on zscaler.com/threatlabs. So let me actually switch to a few dashboards. I know we're running a little late on the time, but I'll quickly go through this. So if you go to zscaler.com/threatlabs, you will see there are several dashboards that are exposed over there. It covers things like overall telemetry, threats that are being blocked in near real time, IoT dashboard, where you could see things like shadow IoT devices that are commonly found in enterprise network, encrypted traffic, and then also more recently work from home dashboard. So the very first one I'm showing you is the overall telemetry dashboard. As you can see, in the last 24 hours, Zscaler Cloud processed 160 billion transactions. And at any given time, we are scanning 2.1 million transactions. And this is where we're applying all the security definition, threat intelligence, and taking action in real time. Now, this results in about 5.6 billion policy enforcement. These are policies that the customers have configured in the product. And then, like I mentioned, over 125 million. The last 24 hours was 134.3 million threats were blocked out of these transactions that were processed. Now, one of the key trend, and this is very, very important, the amount of encrypted traffic that goes to internet from modern enterprise, almost 80% of all internet traffic is encrypted, right? So unless you are inspecting that SLTLS encrypted traffic, you're basically blind to 80% of outbound traffic, right? So very, very important to open TLS connections and apply all those security intelligence that I was showcasing to you guys in the previous slide, because that's where you will be able to block some of those advanced persistent threats. Zooming into some of the threat trends, we also expose what are some of the prevalent threats that we're seeing in the cloud. You could actually play around with this dashboard. Let's say if I want to look at just top phishing attacks that we're seeing in past 24 hours. As you can see, Microsoft properties are among the top targeted corporate services, Office 365, OneDrive, they're also after Facebook. Right, so you will be able to take a look at all the prevalent threats, different threat categories, and this is just a sample of top things that we're seeing in the cloud that is being exposed over here. And then finally, the work from home, work from anywhere dashboard. This is actually very, very interesting. What you see over here is the team started building out a timeline pre-COVID, And as Dominic and Andy were talking about post-COVID, we're starting to enter that era as well, where the amount of users that are working from office versus the amount of users that are remote, right? So that percentage was anywhere from 80 to 90% in office, 10% remote. And after COVID, it's basically going towards a 50-50 timeline, right? Where some of them might always be doing that for the foreseeable future, where a few days they'll be in the office, few days they'll be at home. A lot of other interesting stats that you could look at over here, types of applications that we're seeing being accessed by the remote users. A lot of file sharing, collaborative apps are being accessed. Again, these are all also leveraged by the bad guys when they're targeting your enterprise users. So it's very important to open those TLS for us to inspect those payloads. All right, switching back to this. Okay. So what are some of the key threat landscape trends that we're seeing? So many of the attacks over the past 12 to 18 months are tailored towards targeting your remote users. And what we see over here is the attackers are leveraging COVID-19 related themes. Initially, it was about tests, and then it was about masks, test kits. And now it's about vaccination. A lot of the themes, and these are fairly targeted in nature as well, they will try to get your user to click or visit a destination that will result in the user's system being compromised. More and more attacks are leveraging those trusted apps, like I was pointing out, OneDrive. In fact, 30% of all encrypted attacks that Zscaler saw in 2020 were leveraging things like OneDrive, Google Drive, AWS to host one of the payloads in the multi-stage attacks. The other increasing trends is where we are seeing a lot of spear phishing attacks that are leveraging email, WhatsApp, and also LinkedIn, right? And this is where these adversaries are targeting the executives at the company. In fact, we just published about a fairly targeted campaign where the adversaries were using fake Google reCAPTCHA technique. So before the actual phishing page is served, they will make you solve a Google reCAPTCHA and then fish for your credentials. And the targets of this phishing campaign involve majority of the execs and finance officers in these companies. Ransomware attacks continue to evolve. We see more and more targeted tactics being leveraged. In fact, I have a quick demo that I'll walk you guys through what it looks like. And then, of course, we've all been talking about SolarWinds, increased risk of supply chain attacks. I have just one slide showcasing what the security strategy should look like if you were to safeguard your organization against these type of supply chain attacks. And then finally, Microsoft Exchange Server. So in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll jump on the ransomware attack demo first, and then we'll spend a couple minutes on the SolarWinds part. All right. So here's a typical attack chain that starts with a spear phishing email. This is a real attack that was observed late last year in 2020. The user receives an email with a link pointing to Google Docs. If the user falls for it, they will see a Google Docs page notifying of an employment termination list. If a user clicks on it, a document gets downloaded. And again, it uses social engineering tactic, convincing the user they need to run macro in order to see the full list. Going forward, if the user clicked on it, his machine gets infected. Now, if this machine is part of a legacy enterprise network, this malware will then have ability to spread across other machines. This is the lateral movement part that we heard is one of the primary concerns for most CISOs. Right? The goal over here for the attacker then is to steal sensitive data and then finally launch the ransomware attack that brings down the entire business operation. Now, looking at it from the lens of zero trust exchange, if say a customer or prospect is using a strategy where anything that arises from external sources or any kind of file hosting service gets redirected to say Zscaler's cloud browser isolation instance. So in this case, what you're seeing is the destination gets opened in an isolated instance. No active content, whether it's from the Google Docs link or the actual document, will ever land on the user's machine. So you're able to break the attack chain fairly early on itself. Now, let's say the organization was not using the browser isolation. In that case, since both of these payloads were hosted on Google property, it is extremely important to perform SSL inspection and then apply all the other security layers on that. The next important piece over here is implementing zero trust network access architecture, right? If the organization has that implemented, the endpoint, which is compromised, does not have a network presence along with all the other important assets in the environment. So the adversary is not able to perform lateral propagation at this stage. Now let's assume that the machine that was compromised belongs to CFO, right? And the adversary tries to steal sensitive financial documents. So you can leverage something called Zscaler's data loss protection to block these kind of data exfiltration attempts, no matter where your user is. And then finally, at the ransomware stage, this is one of the most important layer, which is called Zscaler's Advanced Cloud Sandbox. It allows you to break this attack chain at multiple levels, starting with the malicious macro doc, first stage executable, and then the final stage ransomware payload itself. So if I were to envision this from an attack chain perspective, your security team should have opportunity to break these kind of targeted attack chains at multiple levels using a combination of preventive security controls as well as the defensive ones, right? And this is where your strategy should be to have policies in place that will block those unknown attacks, right? So things like block newly registered domains, block certain types of file types, leveraging AI ML, and make it extremely difficult for the adversary to leverage that one compromised endpoint, right, to bring down your entire business operation.